Oh, yes.
Any big plans?
Gonna get started on my 10-page essay that's due in a week.
Wow, 10 pages, what class is that?
That's for, it's a Wordsworth and Coleridge class, it's for honors.
Okay.
Is the paper for this class in Blackboard yet?
Is what?
The paper that we gotta do for this class, is it in the Blackboard yet?
To where you can submit it?
Yeah.
Good question. If it's not, I'll put it up
Okay.
at the end of class. Thanks for reminding me. Anything else? Who's excited for the summer break?
It's so much fun, so productive. I'm so excited.
Anyone going to summer school?
I did it last year, never did it.
No.
I'm hoping to get into a research program, that's one of my goals.
Nice. Have you started applying?
I haven't had a lot of chance to look into it yet, but I live in Evanston, so right next to Northwestern, and I'm trying to see if, they've got any events going on during the summer, it would be fun.
Yeah, that's real convenient for you.
Yes, it is.
All right, so next Friday will be last class in person. We'll take our exam that Monday, the 29th. So we'll wrap up Sex for Sale probably next Wednesday, or maybe our last class, we just hang out, have some snacks or some pizza or something, all right, and just talk off topic about whatever we want to. So yeah, we're down to kind of 2 classes of lectures. All right, this final chapter is dealing with sex for sale, right? The processes of how sex is sold, distributed, how all that looks. We'll also look at forms of historical attributes of pornography, right? We'll look at prostitution. We'll look at sort of the mechanisms behind selling sex, what it does to individuals who receive it or stimulate them impulsively, as they create addictions for pornography and other materials like that. All right, so what is pornography, right? We may think that pornography itself is a relatively modern or contemporary sort of concept, but pornography has been around in some way, shape, or form since the dawn of time, right? But here we're defining it as sexually explicit material intended to cause sexual arousal. Here the operative word would be explicit, right? Is it explicit or implicit? We're saying explicit is everyone can kind of see directly what is being written, viewed, right, or spoken in some way to elicit an actual sexual response. A little bit different if something is sort of muted or subtle, and we can ask a range of people and they say, I see nothing sexual about this, or others looking at the same thing will say, yeah, I see some sexual undertones, right? There's something there that's arousing of some sort. We can say pornography could be professionally produced or homemade, right? So we say professionally produced, camera, person, director, lighting, sound, maybe even a company behind it to disseminate or distribute the material, right? Some sort of corporate gesturing or something of the sort. Whereas homemade, we say, hey, we are engaging in writing, visualizations, or spoken aspects of pornography in a private setting, right? Private setting. Private setting means using your phone. Maybe you're creating pornography with your phone, right? Or your laptop, or your tablet, or your personal camera, or recording device of some sort, right? So we want to kind of keep that mindset, right? Like, although we may view pornography primarily in a commercial sense, we as individual people in modern society may also be engaging in pornographic creation, dissemination in some way too. People could be sexting one another, right? People could be recording one another, sharing photos to some degree, right? Even we say having talk about sex, right? But we say spoken as a big element of this, right? So you could say talking about sex, sexing, all the above, right? But so we got hundreds of categories of pornography. What do we say? Pornography can be classified and categorized based on maybe one's individual preferences for what stimulates them sexually within the broad category of pornography. So pornography has sort of a spectrum, right? People like sort of certain niches about pornography, right? Pornographic behavior, what is your preference? What do you normally search for? What are you normally looking for? What arouses you? What doesn't arouse you? Right? Say some people, some of the categories here could be orgies, where we're talking about multiple people engaging in sexual activity. We could say interracial, right? Think of the sort of psychological and social aspects of that. Some people will be more inclined for interracial pornography than others. Bondage, when we saw BDSM, right? Binding, sadomasochism, things like that. Discipline, obesity, fetishes, toys, right? In discipline, we could talk about maybe some sort of obedience to some degree, or restriction, or maybe we're looking even at things that could be like religious aspects of pornography, right? We're looking at nuns and priests and engaging in that sort of material. Or even age, right? We say, some people are looking to be stimulated by older or younger set of categories for pornography. All right, pornography at the forefront of technology, right? It drives the technology. We really think about that, a lot of the inventions or innovations that we have was kind of driven towards pleasure.
Thank you.
Right? It leads to the sexual advancement. More easier ways to get there, to view the material, to receive the material, to hear the material. Right? There's been a driver, and as you can clearly see, most of it is free. We've made it convenient, and we've made it free, right? So we've opened up and driven this marketplace with innovation to that. We say, well, your phone can be primarily used for engaging in some form of pornography, right? You're looking at the images, the videos. Once again, you're sexting people using your phone through text messaging. You're sending videos and photos, exchanging those sort of materials there. So obviously the technology has a really big driver of exchanging pornography or pornographic sort of reception for one another. Right, you think of dating apps, right? The pornographic material shared there. It could be explicit, it could be right there on the profile, or it could be something a little bit slow. Erotica is a little bit different, right? We say depictions of sexuality which display mutuality, respect, affection, and balance of power. Whereas we view pornography more as a dominant sort of display of sexual activity, we say here is a little bit more muted. Right? We're talking about literature and art. We're placing that in some mediums that we may feel to be beautiful and artistic, and the verbiage is a main driver, the setup of a story, right, as opposed to just raw engagement of sexual activities, in which case, the man may be coercive and dominant towards his female partner. Those would be kind of traditional pornography, but erotica is a little bit more so, right? We're trying to engage the mind and develop some sort of creativity to it. A lot of erotica is female produced, right? Because we think of maybe the differences between the sexes, maybe the primary drivers for men who watch this sort of material is to get straight to the point, right? Whereas we say, for the most part, likelihood that doesn't necessarily do it for most women. There needs to be a build-up, right? Physical mechanisms, lubrication, stimulation in the amygdala to make it emotional, to make it get to a point where one will be stimulated. So maybe we say women are stimulated at a slower pace, right? Whereas the men more driven to the pornography aspect of getting to it and having that dominance over their female partner. Erotica may be, something of the story, even though you could include like 50 Shades of Grey. Like, it's good, it gets there to BDSM and all of that stuff, but maybe by chapter 3, right? And maybe you may not see as many men purchasing or consuming that type of material because they're not primarily going to wait to chapter 3 to be stimulated sexually, right? Child pornography, excluded, right? The Supreme Court and our government has excluded child pornography from First Amendment protection of free speech, right? So it's not protected by free speech. It is a federal crime. It is illegal. Any production, sale, distribution of sexual images of children under the age of 18 are illegal under numerous federal and state laws, right? Remember we said, what is any form of pornography? Is sexting, right? Communicating in even a sexual way with someone under the age of 18. Exchanging those communications, exchanging images, exchanging recordings, right? Maybe exchanging even audio recordings, anything. But here we say really images are a big part of it. Right? They're really, the images are number one, right? Because we say humans are primarily, over all senses, we are primarily visual. Right? Visual is the primary dominant sense. All right, so we say yes, sexting can be considered child pornography. The messages themselves, not just the photos. All right, there's some variations in straight, gay, and lesbian pornography, right? Some of them differ on some general characteristics, but most of straight porn has a formula to it, right? Which is close-ups of the engagement or the interaction, in the various positions of intercourse and oral and anal sex. The gay porn industry is comparable to the straight porn industry in size, all right, and scale. And there are fewer lesbian porn films made, right? That kind of gives you a little bit of an outlook to the demands of our society. We say, well, gay porn industry is just as large as heterosexual porn industry, right? But lesbian porn activities tend to be less. Right, these are not modern inventions. We may think that they're modern, but in mostly all ancient civilizations, there were pictures, right, or representations, pictorial, written representations of sexuality. We say, hey, even prehistoric cave drawings depict sexuality. Right? So people are thinking about sex. We may think in our minds we're the only one thinking about sex, but obviously people had the same reproductive organs since the dawn of mankind, right? And so obviously they were engaging probably in the same things that we are today, just probably the commercialization is the difference, right, with the advancement of technologies. And also the increase of communications and ability to exchange with others, right? Because we probably didn't have so many inter-ethnic or interracial sexual engagements because of limitations to travel, rules, and, viewpoints. But the big one is that photography expanded pornography. So we say photography invented maybe like the 1820s, I believe, 1822, maybe. So you say that revolutionized putting it on a wall somewhere as a painting, or carving it in some stone. Well, right about it, now we have an actual way to reproduce the visual image. Then we have a transition of pornography business from an underground enterprise, which was mostly social taboo, to multi-billion-dollar industry, which Hugh Hefner kind of took us to with Playboy. Right? That's why Hefner was such a prominent figure. In essence, trying to make pornography acceptable in society by making it somewhat classy. Right? So you see kind of some of the women that Hefner would have, they would have a certain look, certain class, but also maybe participate in showing their nude bodies within Playboy magazine. So it made the form more acceptable because it wasn't done in some sort of classless or crass way, the way it was published. Let's take a look at some ancient pornography. All right, this is from Mesopotamia. Female and male on a clay plaque, Mesopotamia. This is 2000 before the Common Era, right? 2000 BCE, right? This is a sculpture in India, 1st century BC. It's at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, MoMA in New York. Courtship scene on an Athenian black figure, right? This is 540 BCE. I think this is from Greece. Yeah, this is Athenian. Yep, this is from Greece. Figurine with exaggerated sexual characteristics. It's from Wendell, if you're not too sure of this. Right, pick the glyph of a vulva. As we see, pornography is not new. But we have to think of sort of your rights, right? What do you have a right to look at? What do you don't? Right? Do you think it's right that you're not able to look at certain things? Should it be restricted? Right? Who governs what we could be able to view and not view in terms of pornography, right? Because it deals with freedom of speech versus censorship, right? Is the government trying to censor you or censor society as a whole from engaging in things that they demand or want to, or are they protecting the vulnerable in some sense, right? So the U.S. Constitution's First Amendment does not apply categorically to obscene materials, right? So we say that free speech is not particularly protecting everything. Now, obscene, we say that definition is kind of subjective, a bit abstract, but really what the Supreme Court here is saying that obscene is something that is explicit and direct in terms of creating a sexual response. It's something that is very explicit. Right? Doesn't mean that you can't put undertones in things or sexual sort of subtleties and things, but it shouldn't be direct. Right, there was a controversial opinion, I think it was Roth versus maybe Jordan or something like that, in the 50s, and it dealt with material that had more of a homosexual sort of audience it was geared towards, and that had to be taken up by the Supreme Court, and that's kind of where they took out what obscenity, well, it kind of constituted what obscenity is. They said the dominant thing of the work as a whole must appeal to prurient interest in sex. We say prurient interest in sex. It has to be kind of geared towards a sexual audience. Right? It kind of has to be within that business. It can't just be out to a general audience. The general audience, they say, hey, there's a bunch of people that think that's offensive, and I'm saying. It has to be geared to people who are interested in that particular type of material. Right? Because if not, then you say if that's not the case, then we can show all sexual stuff to children and the elderly and people who don't see that stuff and find it offensive. They're triggered by it. Work must be patently offensive to contemporary community standards, and maybe that changes. Maybe contemporary community standards have broadened since the 50s. Now we see a lot more, maybe, dominant thing of sex having a broader audience because contemporary community standards have changed. No longer as offensive to many people. Right? More people make it acceptable. Work must be without serious literary, artistic, political, or scientific value. Right? What you say, back to this is kind of what's your dominant thing, right? Don't try to overlap these sort of frameworks. Right? Because we say these are kind of educational, they're to inform, they're informational, and they're for learning. And if we, as a society, love to just push out these narratives of sex in those areas, then we probably see a reduction in productivity in education, learning, all sorts of areas. Okay? So we say it kind of undermines the growth of the entire society if we allow it to just be everywhere. All right, so they had a couple commissions, right, to kind of deal with pornography. Because we say, well, around the time that Playboy came out, we saw like in the 50s, late 50s, we're like, whoa, it's starting to get big. We got magazines about it now. Obviously, we know the competitors are going to come through. There's a lot of money. Multi-billion dollars, people are thinking of new and innovative ways to reach larger audiences. It's just business, right? So we know that once the market begins, you can't really stop it, right? Once the innovation begins, it can't be stopped. So you have to kind of moderate it or fight back. Right? And we live in a pretty diverse country, so like, well, maybe the South is a little bit more prude, the North is a little bit more open and liberal, the West is somewhere in between. You got different perspectives all around the country, right? But depending on who's in office, what their agendas are, they're probably gonna fight for their constituents, right? So we got the commissions on obscenity and pornography, recommended repeal of all adult pornography laws. Right? This kind of dealt once again with freedom of speech, constitutional rights. I think it started with some of the issues down in Georgia, but I think Lyndon Johnson may have been president at this time. Right? Because I think it was like the Presidential Commission on Obscenity and Pornography to kind of deal with those issues. And then we got things like the Meese Commission. The Meese Commission dealt with, that was in 1985 through 86. And it kind of looked at the relationship between pornography and the commercialization of pornography and like sexual violence and violence altogether. Right? It wanted to observe was pornography and the commercialization of it creating more people to commit sexual crimes? Did it make people more overall violent? Did it create more anti sort of conduct with individuals, right? And this commission found that it did. So Warner recommended vigorous prosecution of obscenity. Right? Finding things obscene to be undermining the total value systems in the country, relating it to violence, sexual violence, right? Aggression, and antisocial conduct, which a lot of people disagree, especially if you're into that stuff. Is pornography helpful? Some positive aspects. Sexual stimulation without risk of pregnancy or STI. Say you have a high sex drive, right? You have a high desire for sexual stimulation. You're easily stimulated, right? Remember we say sex drive can be anxiety. Anxiety is pent up stress, or you're gonna have maybe Freud described it as stuck energy, pent up energy in the subconscious mind. It needs to be released, right? If it's not released in one form, it'll come out in another form. So it can, you can engage in watching pornography and, I guess, satisfying your urges or whatnot, without impregnating someone or catching a disease, right? Okay. Provides fantasy material. We say creativity is a fundamental sort of gift to human beings, right? Our creativity to create the things that we've created. Provides good fantasy material. Maybe you can use that material at a later date when you finally do get with someone, right? In some degree. Can even out differences in frequency of interest between partners. So you may have a partner who doesn't like sex, right? Or doesn't like being sexually stimulated in that way. They're not stimulated, right? They're maybe asexual in some way, right? They're not really interested in sex like that, but you still have a relationship to work on, right? And so maybe watching pornography is somewhat helpful to ease out one partner over the next. May lead to an increase in communication with partners and improved sexual experiences, right? Communication is figuring out everyone's interests, and even the interests may change, right? Because it says limited to only the information. You may expose someone to the information of new ways of engaging in sex, things you may want to experiment and try, right? Figuring out what each person likes. And pornography may be a good illustration. So you say pornography is anything. It could be a book. Hey, let's read this book together, right? A romantic novel, sexual fantasy novel, right? Or it could be play. It could be, we saw that was text messages, like, figuring out each other's stimulation based on texting each other, right? Or it could be showing some form of pornography or something, right? All right, let us see if we can get a good discussion question. All right, here's a good one. All right, at what age should parents start talking with children or teenagers about pornography? How should this conversation start, and what content should it cover? I'll put it up on the board too. All right, at what age? Let's think hypothetically, you have children, right? I mean, do you just allow, what do wanna one day walk in on your kid masturbating because you didn't have a conversation? You felt uncomfortable to communicate with your child about what it's like to be a human being as you develop and get sexual urges or whatnot, right? So we wanna think as maybe like responsible adults and possible future parents, right? What age should parents start talking with children or teenagers about it, you know? You wish your own parents had talked to you about it, or you had to just figure it out yourself. How should this conversation start and what should it cover? You three could be one group, and then, you know, let's do the front row as a group, and then you do it. Yeah, I know you want it there, but we gotta break it up. Think about your own child, think about, you know, possibility of having your own children. How are you gonna approach this situation, right? And at what age? I wanna know what age you think is appropriate.
Yeah. Yeah. There should be a, or it's a dad, something should be a mom, dog. Yeah, like, don't, or makes. Not that, like, you, I mean, you can if you want to, I think it's like, your thoughts, my dad can do it. I'd be like, please leave. Right? Middle school, please leave. Have another kid in there, you're like, also leave, but more comfortable with you, I guess. I don't know what age, cause I know boys are. Yeah. I feel like.
14.
A guy's probably like.
That's why you just raise your children in
Okay, what age
isolation and
does that
never let them
happen?
interact with anybody else.
Oh.
Homeschooling.
Yeah. I mean, I was homeschooled for a while and I'm really cool.
Yeah,
I just
yeah.
learn
I would
The
want,
protection.
actually, okay, one thing we would cover is don't make only pornography, like don't let your visual, you know, record it or whatever. Yeah, so I think that should definitely be covered.
maybe like safety measures
Is
with
the
social
media.
And especially if they are a minor, I mean, because we were talking about like sexting and everything earlier with child pornography. And I think that's maybe where the conversation would be necessary, being like, hey, kind of like
I mean, like,
instill a little bit of fear of like, hey, you know, take pictures, so you're technically screen child pornography. And then they'll be like, because they did that to us in my, what was it, like middle school. They were like, don't send pictures of yourself because you can get charged for spreading your own child pornography. And I was like, really?
Okay, that's an excellent point. I mean, in your conversations, think about what we just define as pornography. Right? You maybe think of somebody just watching porn. But it's not just watching. We're talking about texting, communicating, writing notes to each other. Like, it could be anything, written, verbal, spoken, or visual.
You would tell them if you don't want me to read it or see it.
Yeah.
If you don't want this screenshot sent to your entire school,
Then
then
about
don't,
that
then
first.
that's, yeah.
About the,
It could be embarrassment. Yeah.
erotic fan fiction written by 14-year-olds. Is
Okay.
that would also be a whole thing. That was about the time that I remember people being really into erotic fan fiction of, oh, my parents told me to One Direction.
The classic.
Yeah, the classic.
That's what I going into high school. Okay. Yeah, I guess that's probably decent. That's when we started intense and
Yeah, because they're gonna get pressured. They're gonna get pressured by other people. Because they're gonna be like, no, it's Snapchat, we'll never be able to
Oh, they got away with that.
All right, let's see what we got. First group. What are some of your thoughts on this?
As a sister who's kind of going through like, she's 11, so she's kind of like getting to that point. It's like kind of weird to like talk about it because it's like, you know, I don't know how to explain it to my sister. So, but I would say probably around that age, 11 or 12, like we start having those conversations.
So right around like the beginning of puberty.
Yeah, especially yeah, because that's when children's bodies are changing
Yeah.
so much, and their minds are all over the place when it comes to their, you know, sex drive and just how everything is functioning.
Yeah.
So,
Has mom and dad, like, have you got with mom and dad to also talk about like how to approach? Or you just kind of like, since you guys probably have a different relationship, right? She's probably more comfortable.
yeah, so
Engaged in
with my sister, it's a little bit different because she grew up with me and my brother, so I feel like she's a little bit more mature than having two older brothers. So I mean, I feel like if you have that talk with your kid at a younger age, I feel like it's just if you think they're mature enough for it. So
Yeah.
for the most part, yeah, she's definitely going through this stuff right now. So to be able to see it firsthand, it's from
Yeah.
an older perspective, it feels a little
Do
bit different.
you, like the way you say you view it, you kind of know what's going on now? Is it more so like the conversations that you have or
Yeah, I mean-
things you find out, like social media or what is it?
Yeah, so, I mean, obviously, I mean, she's a girl and I'm a guy, so that's different, but
Yeah.
like, I mean, just the way she interacts with kids at school and just, so we definitely have a social media talk for sure, so
Yeah.
you gotta be, close to yourself in certain ways, so, yeah, it's a good question, because my family's really going through something like this, so.
Yeah, yeah. All right, so 11. Any of you have different?
Yeah, so I was like trying to remember my middle school experience, and I honestly remember being in like sixth grade and hearing like the boys talk about like porn, and I was so confused at the time. Like, obviously, I think I was around like 11 when my parents, like 11 or 12, my parents were telling me like, oh, you know, like there's a certain thing that like a mom and dad do to have a kid or whatever, everything like that. But I think once I was getting closer to like, you know, getting my period and stuff like that, my parents were more open about, you know, you have to be careful, like one day you're gonna probably hear about it, but like you still have to be aware of what you're posting, and like, you know, don't like post like explicit pictures. If someone sends you a picture like that, you have to tell us, that kind of thing. So I do think like having a conversation like around like the age like 12, like not full on right away, but like ease your way
An
into-
introduction to
Yeah,
it.
an introduction, because once you go into high school, it's a whole new world. So like me going into high school, there were so many things that like I was aware about, but it was still like, wow, these people already know what this is, and I had never even like heard about it. But there's other things that I'm like, oh yeah, I remember them talking about that in like sixth grade.
Yeah.
So it's like, I think it's good to like, in that junior high type, like entering junior high, start to introduce your kid about it. Cause once you get into high school, like, how they were mentioning, there's people who can pressure you to do things and you don't even realize, like what you have on your phone could be child pornography, you know, that kind of
Yeah.
thing. And you, or like the sexting thing too, like there's kids in middle school now that they're like sexting, they don't even realize what it is. I think having a conversation like around that age is important.
So you say preparing them for high school, because high school is where really you can lose control of your child, right? Because we already saw that the influence changed at high school where it's more peer dominant. That's where it changes from like parent dominant to peer dominant influence. And it kind of switches. Do you feel the same? Or did you come up with a different age?
I have a bit of a different experience. I had the talk in fifth grade with my class, and they had it in more of a negative way of pornography. Like they're like, never like see it, watch it, hear it, read it, like don't do that. And it was confusing because they didn't explain why it was bad. They just said it's bad. Like don't watch it.
And you think that's a bad approach?
Yeah, because when you tell someone no, they're probably gonna go and do it anyway. So when they're telling us no, it kind of is like, well, like why? And you know, if you don't have like a relationship with your parents and you can't ask, you're just gonna go look it up and unrestricted internet
Is
access.
you think of like, hey, human nature, we do like to make our own decisions, free choice, free will. That's a dominant feature. So if you tell anybody, don't look, don't hear, don't listen, you know, subconsciously we're taking it as like, you can't tell me what to do, right? I need to figure this out. My mind's gonna be curious because you're kind of forcing me, right? You're being coercive for me not to do something. And we always know that we push back on that. We don't like that. We like to be made our own choice. That's why we commit crimes. You know, here's the rule, like, forget the rules, right? Okay, so 5th grade. Okay. Over here.
So we were thinking a bit older in, probably 14, 15, right when you get into high school, because of those pressures, because it's all about the dating now, you know, with middle schoolers, you know, they say, oh, let's hug after school, you know, they don't really understand the concepts of dating yet, but then in high school, when people are more mature and everybody else is figuring things out, then you're really going to get into, we were saying before about those really high pressure situations. And now it's reasonable for you as a 15, 16-year-old to start dating somebody, and that's innocent enough. But then if you're dating the type of person who says, no, this is what we have to do in a relationship, we have to be sending me pictures, we have to be, you know, doing these things because this is what couples do when they're in high school, then that's where you get into the child pornography aspect of it. And that was, because I talked too loud, we've heard a little bit about that already, how it was really, like, it was a big scary thing, at least when I learned about it.
Yeah.
Which was about that time that it is child pornography, and the person you sent it to, they'll be jailed for having it, and then you will be too.
Yeah.
And since it was a small town, they had the police chief that everybody knew was like, I will come and get you myself. I will tear your phone away and I'll find everything. So don't do it. So I was like, okay, I won't.
So they use
convinced me.
fear
Yeah.
at that. Was it a religious school?
No, it was
Okay,
just a small,
just a small-
it was just a small community.
Small community, okay.
Because you're like, I know your parents and your grandparents and everybody will know what you did.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, okay.
So you think 15?
Yeah, it's like the blossoming into when they start seriously dating.
Okay. So here are a couple different things. One said 11, we heard like 11, 12-ish, right? We heard 15, which is like sophomore, right? 11, 12-ish, we're talking about 5th, 6th grade. And yours was what age? What age? 10, 11. Okay, so this group over here is more let's just say 5th, 6th grade. Over here, we're saying high school, a year into high school. Your other group members feel the same way?
I would say more freshman high school, so 14.
So like
Yeah,
14.
Like 13, 14 going into high school.
Okay.
Like summer.
What about over here? Good?
Here, 13, 14, 15, like junior high school.
All right, interesting.
Like, we never had those. Well, for me personally, my parents never talked about pornography with me. I don't know if it was because I was the only girl and they only talked, I don't know. I don't ever remember it being a big thing in school for me either.
Yeah.
But I went to a huge school, so you know.
Well, how do you think the conversation should start? Let's say let's say you have a child. And they're entering that age that you just said that it
Yeah.
should start, like, how should that conversation go? Is it the same approach? You go to jail,
I don't know what else to do besides instill fear.
it's still fear. And that could be it. I mean, that could be a strategy. You say, hey, my personal strategy, I think instilling fear might work best. And at a later date, I'll take a different approach.
Yeah.
Open them
Yeah,
up.
then we can have a conversation.
What do you,
I think I'd instill like caution, like if I were to see this, like how would you feel? Would you be embarrassed? Like if it was sent out to your entire class, how would you feel? Like would you be embarrassed? Like that kind of thing. Like just internalize it. So like, yeah, you're in the moment right now, but what if it gets out? Like, I don't know, because a lot of people don't think in the future, whenever they're doing something, like, it's just very impulsive, so I would just be wary of their impulsiveness.
I guess, whenever a situation arises where they're like, they really like this boy, or they really like this girl, and they wanna take a picture real
Yeah.
quick and be like, well, this will make them like me more because this is what this other girl is doing for him, type deal, so.
I get, so what you're saying is like, you have to take a little bit more reflective approach
Yeah.
as the feelings come on. Whereas we say, hey, just don't do it,
Yeah.
right? Like, don't even reflect on it, just don't do it, right? That might be the approach. That's what they taught you in school, right?
Yeah.
Just don't even think about it, just don't do it, right? The consequences are horrible.
Cause when you get older and you're like in a relationship, like way past, like, I don't know, like late 20s or something, you're in a relationship for a couple of years, I mean, you're gonna probably sext your significant other, you're probably gonna send pictures, whatever, to keep the relationship going or alive, or I don't know. So I wouldn't want my child to have like PTSD and be like, oh my God, I've been with them for 10 years, but I can't do this, I can't send these pictures because of this fear that my parents instilled in me, you know?
Yeah, you say things change and we're social animals, so we are referencing even our relationship with people, oftentimes with other people. We watch shows, 90 Day Fiance, Married at First Sight, or, you know, we go on Instagram and see perfect couple, right? What they're doing, and then we say what you're not doing,
Yeah.
right? And what we're not doing, we're like, we should experiment and try what they're doing. What about this? Right, so we have this frame of reference that's very socially embedded in us. Now, I forgot to ask you all, how would that conversation start? So, with your sister, how do you think you would start? Have you thought of any way that you could like introduce this conversation?
Well, I'm not trying to like prove it too much information, but
Yeah.
she's like already starting her period and all that. So
Mhm.
my mom has already had to like, you know, I'm a guy, so I really don't much, but
Yeah.
like, my mom has already like been helping her out with it. And
Gotcha.
my mom works at the same school as my sister, my sister goes to, so that's been helpful. But just slowly when she'd like to start discovering new things about herself and like all that, we're just taking it really slow.
Yeah.
Because
So maybe like, hey, mom, you take care of the physiological aspect. I might try to help take the logical aspect of
yeah,
consequences of behavior.
yeah,
Right, and maybe you're like, hey, I'm a guy, so I'm gonna give you the aspect of what generally, what you think a young boy or men
yeah.
might be persuading you to do, right? And the social forces that can make you do things that probably aren't gonna be good for you down the line.
When I'm home, I go and eat lunch with my sister all the time at school, and like I like get to see what these kids are doing and how they're acting, and it's like, this is what you should look out for, and these are the kids you should stay away from and all that. So
Yeah, I mean-
that's my cool home to big brother.
Yeah, we could see even the periods are first, mints to use your first period are getting younger and younger and younger, right? And we say that's obviously environment is an impact on genetics, right? So our environments that people are engaging in sex earlier, our genetic code is saying, guess what? People are engaging in sex early over time. So, yeah, from my generation to your generation, it's probably a huge gap on like what people were doing at 12, 13, 14, right? And now you think of this other generation who's born into Snapchat and all that stuff, who like, what they're getting into at 12, 13, 14 is probably just crazy for you. Imagine what I think about.
It's kind of scary because like when I was her age, I didn't worry about a thing, and then I go and hang out with these kids, and it's like they're saying all these terms and slang, and it's like,
Yeah, they're like, in some way, the older you get, you kind of like, the kids are doing far more than you as an adult would ever do or even say, right?
This fourth grader came up to me and was like, put it on God.
You're too much.
It's really changing this dynamic of it is so different.
Yeah, it's hard to keep up with. Same, I mean, well, what do you think? What would be your approach to starting conversations if you had a kid?
It's really hard, especially like you guys are mentioning, like now this new generation is so born into social media. There's so many different approaches that you can take, like obviously having like what grade. But I feel like I would just start like off little by little, like, you know, like it's okay if you like a boy or like a girl, like, you know, that's fine. But I feel like I would just start little by little, like, you know, just be careful, like, you know, there's nothing wrong with holding their hand or like, you know, giving them a hug or something like that. But like, I do think that you have to ease your way into what is a relationship, what is it to have a boyfriend or girlfriend, and then talk about like, especially if she's a girl, like with her period, like what the consequences could be if you engage in sex and this girl already has had her period type of thing, you know. I think that whole like pregnancy talk too, and then obviously ease your way into like what is porn, you know, what is child pornography, what the consequences could be, like how she said too, if you wouldn't want me to see that or like your classmates to see that, like don't do something like that.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of the approach I would take.
All right, so say a very slow approach, easing it into it, because if you come on too strong, it may backfire. And we said people do the opposite, what you tell them don't do. If you come on too strong, like, you tell them don't look at all, and you don't even give them a choice. Kind of same approach or something
Yeah,
different?
along the same lines, just telling them like what is okay in a relationship and then what's probably not okay, like toxicity and, you know, avoid like religion like in that sense. But, yeah.
Okay. Anyone else got anything to add in terms of approach or anything? Okay. Last group.
We were thinking to start having a talk between 8th grade, so 13, 14. And just like everyone said, start gradually, don't just jump into it. I feel like you have to, around middle school, you have to notice what your kid is doing and who they're hanging out with. And then when those situations comes, just let them know the consequences and just give them the full information.
Okay. So your approach is just kind of a rational one, like how you're gonna start off? Anybody else have a different approach?
I don't know. Cause like 14, 13, that's like the ideal age, cause that's like thinking back myself, like I went to elementary school in the inner city, so like 3rd or 4th grade, people was like, you know, playing these type of games and stuff like that. So it might be like, good to just might like say a little something when they're like maybe 4th, 5th grade, that's really into things. And then once they get older into the 8th grade, getting into high school, maybe become a little more knowledgeable about it.
Yeah, okay, so you said drop a little hints about stuff in grade school, and then add on a little bit more logical, good information in high school. But don't try to dictate or drive their behavior, you're saying just inform them.
Well, no, I think you should dictate their behavior at
Okay.
a young age, cause I'm like, just thinking, like, I didn't really have the talk or nothing like that, but like, I knew everything just cause like elementary school, like, even leaving elementary school, like, that's the whole, 1st through 8th grade, like, I don't know if it was the same for everybody else.
Yeah.
This kid is crazy, so.
Yeah, I mean, it was even bad when I was, it generally started like 5th, 6th grade. That's when people start really like, you know, sneaking off drinking, daytime parties, parents didn't know about it, lying, and just doing all the stuff to engage in some sort of activity to some degree. But it's interesting, all of you say around the age of start of puberty, right? Because you're saying, hey, this is different. Yes, a social thing happening, because you're around other people who are going to be going through it, but your body is physically changing to drive different urges that you didn't have before, right? Even in principles of psychology say, hey, even Freud acknowledged that the latent phase, the part where the psychosexual aspect shut off and like went to sleep, it was like up to age 12, right? And then it came back with puberty, right? It was heightened all the way up to like age 4 or 5, and as soon as you went to grammar school, you kind of shut off, right? Your like knowledge, want to have urges for sex or whatever. Then it comes back on with puberty. So yes, I think maybe a good process of approach would be kind of like you would as an academic. You'd be like, hey, there's a social and biological. Like, hey, you know, your biology is changing, make you understand what's going on with your body, right? And that's gonna cause you to have different urges, right? And think about different things you didn't think about. And then the social force is like, you're also going to be influenced, pressured to do as the Romans do, because that's your environment, right? Everybody wants to be comfortable about it. Think about any environment. You wanna be comfortable, and how to be comfortable is kinda adapt, right? That's what we're built for. So as you go to grade school, you're like, well, I'm here for 8 years. I want this to be the least painful experience possible, right? This as a child subconsciously is thinking, thus they may start to do what others do if it's done properly. Same go to high school, that's a little bit more exacerbated in high school. So maybe the approach is to be highly self-aware about your physical functions, puberty, hormones that may cause your brain to have different urges, desires, and the social aspect, how powerful that is to influence, right? Because you want to adapt and feel comfortable to some degree, right? So it's almost like if you approach a child, I think, in a scientific way, but obviously in a kind of a casual scientific way, they will get the bigger picture, right? The bigger picture is that our body influences our mind, but our environment also influences both, right? Influences both. And so the understanding that power, you can observe and say, oh, I see what's going on, right? The best thing I ever want my children are 4 and 3, right? I want them to just know what's going on. Do not be, right? You just want them to be observing, like, oh, I see what's going on in this power dynamic, right? I see what's going on with my body, right? Well, and then that way, at least if they're conscious, that's the best I can do, to say that they're aware. But if they do something and say, I didn't know, I wasn't thinking, then that's the worst thing I could expect, right? Just saying you were unaware about something, because that's when bad stuff can happen, right? You engage in sexual activity that you didn't even want or felt forced, right? And it has this traumatic effect on you. But if you were like clearly consensual and aware, right, I did what I wanted to do it, and I'm happy with the outcome, I don't know, right? I don't know what to do with that, right? Unless it's like something illegal. But it was just something of their own volition, that's a little bit different. All right, we'll get out of here. We'll come back to prostitution we'll leave that for Wednesday. And we'll wrap up from there, and then next Friday will kind of be our chill day. And our last day. All right, I'll put up the area for submission for the final paper, so if you want to get that in this weekend, that's good. And I'll put up a couple more discussion posts just to get credit. And